I want you to picture something with me. Picture a woman 7 months pregnant, down on her hands and knees, scrubbing a marble floor so white it looks like fresh snow. Her back aches. Her feet are swollen inside shoes that stopped fitting 2 months ago. Her hands that used to be soft, hands her husband used to hold between both of his and kiss like they were something sacred, are cracked and red at the knuckles. Now picture that same woman hearing the front door of the mansion open. Picture her freezing, not because she is afraid of her husband, but because she has spent the last 11 weeks pretending on every phone call, every video chat, every whispered goodnight that everything was perfectly fine, and now he is home. And everything is not fine, and he can see it. He can see all of it. That is where this story begins, not at the beginning of our love. Not at the altar where we stood and made promises to each other in 2 languages, in front of 2 very different families. It begins on a cold Tuesday morning in March, when the man I loved walked through his family's mansion door and saw me on the floor. And the look on his face, I will carry that look for the rest of my life, not because it frightened me, but because it broke something open in him that I had been trying with everything inside me to protect. My name is Amara. I was born in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and I have lived in the United States for 12 years. I am a woman who has known both beauty and hardship. I have walked through both with my chin level and my eyes open. But nothing, not one single experience in my 34 years of living, prepared me for those 11 weeks inside that house. I am telling this story now because my daughter is almost 3 years old and she deserves to know who her mother is, not just the woman she sees making injera in the kitchen on Sunday mornings. Not just the woman who braids her hair and sings to her in Amharic before she falls asleep. She deserves to know what her mother survived before she arrived. And she deserves to know that her father, when he finally saw the truth, did not look away from it. His name is Jae-won Park. And if you knew him before you knew his family, you would understand immediately why I fell in love with him. We met in Atlanta, Georgia, at a community fundraiser for international students. I was working as a volunteer coordinator for a nonprofit that helped newly arrived immigrants navigate their first year in America. Jae-won had come to donate on behalf of his family's business, some formality his father had arranged from Seoul. Something that was supposed to take 20 minutes and involve a check and a handshake. He stayed for 4 hours. He kept finding reasons to stay. He asked me questions about my work with a kind of genuine attention that I was not accustomed to. Not the polite nodding that people do when they are waiting for their turn to speak. He actually listened. He tilted his head slightly when something interested him, and he asked follow-up questions that showed he had heard every word. At the end of the evening, when the chairs were being folded and the lights were being dimmed, he asked me if I would have coffee with him the following morning. I said I would think about it. I had already decided yes before I reached my car. Our first year together was not simple. I want to be honest about that. We came from different worlds, not just different countries, but different entire frameworks of understanding family, obligation, love, and loyalty. In Ethiopian culture, family is everything, but it is expressed through presence, through gathering, through food shared around a common table. In Jae-won's world, family was also everything, but it was expressed through duty, through hierarchy. Through an invisible set of rules that governed who spoke first and who bowed deepest and who had the right to make which decisions. We spent many evenings talking through those differences. Sometimes those conversations were tender, sometimes they were frustrating, but we never stopped having them. That is what I loved most about Jae-won Park. He never stopped trying to understand me. He learned to say my name correctly, not the easy American shortening that strangers defaulted to, but the full sound of it, the way my mother said it. With the gentle emphasis on the second syllable. Amara, he practiced until he had it right, and the first time he said it perfectly, I had to turn away so he would not see my eyes fill. He told me once, about 8 months into our relationship, that he had never met anyone who made him feel both completely known and continually surprised. He said I was the only person in his life who seemed to see him, not the family name, not the business air, not the obligations and expectations, just him. I understood that feeling completely. We were married in a private ceremony in Savannah, Georgia, on a warm October evening with Spanish moss hanging low from the trees and lanterns strung between the branches. His family did not attend. His father sent a brief message of acknowledgement, not congratulations, just acknowledgement. His mother did not send anything at all. His younger brother Yi-hyun attended. He stood beside Yi-won as his witness, and he held my hand afterward and said quietly that he was glad his brother had found someone worthy. I remember thinking that was such an unusual thing to say, worthy, as if being loved required proof of merit. I would come to understand that word very differently in the months that followed. When I became pregnant, Yi-won cried. He sat on the edge of our bed with the test in his hand, and he cried in a way I had never seen him cry before, not with grief, but with something that had no easy name, something enormous and soft. He pulled me close and held me for a long time without speaking, and I could feel his heartbeat against my cheek, steady and full. He said, "She is going to know exactly who she is. She is going to know every part of where she comes from, both parts." I believed him, I still believe him. 2 months after we confirmed the pregnancy, something happened within the Park family that I was not fully permitted to understand. Jae-won explained it to me carefully, in the measured way he explained difficult things, sitting across from me at our kitchen table with both hands flat on the surface, as if grounding himself before he spoke. His father was facing a serious internal crisis within the family organization, not a legal matter, he was careful to say, a family matter. A matter of loyalty and leadership that required Yi-won's physical presence in Seoul. There were people, powerful people, who were questioning the family's direction, and his father needed his eldest son beside him to present a unified front. I asked him how long he would be gone. He said 4 weeks, maybe 6, no longer than 8. I asked him if it was dangerous. He paused before answering, which told me everything I needed to know. He said he would be careful. He said his family had handled situations like this before and that the important thing was for me not to worry. He said it was not the kind of danger I was imagining. He said he wanted me to stay at his family's estate in Virginia while he was away. I want to pause here and tell you something important. I did not want to go. I had met Jae-won's mother, Madame Park, that is what everyone in the household called her, even the family, exactly 4 times. She was a small, immaculately dressed woman with iron gray hair and eyes that had learned long ago how to remain entirely unreadable. She was not cruel in any obvious way during those 4 meetings. She was simply cold, politely, precisely cold. She never once called me by my name. She referred to me as Jae-won's wife, always with a barely perceptible pause before the word wife, the kind of pause that says everything without saying anything at all. But Jae-won asked me to stay there. He said the estate was the safest place, that there were staff and security, and that his mother had agreed to ensure I was comfortable. He said he would call every day. He said his brother Yi-hyun would check on me regularly. He said, "Amara, I need to know you are safe. Please do this for me." When the man you love asks you to do something hard and you can see the weight he is already carrying, and you know the hardest thing for him would be to leave without knowing you were protected, you say yes. I said yes, and I packed my bag, and I got into the car, and I drove to the estate in Virginia. The Park family estate sat on 23 acres outside of Charlottesville. It was the kind of property that made you feel immediately small, not through any intentional cruelty, but simply through its sheer scale. The main house had 14 rooms. There was a formal garden in the back that I never once saw Madame Park actually walk through, only observe from the window of her sitting room with an expression that never changed. The household staff consisted of a housekeeper named Mrs. O, 2 younger women who cleaned and served meals, and a groundskeeper who never came inside. When I arrived, Mrs. O showed me to my room, a large room on the 2nd floor with beautiful light and a window that looked out over the garden. It was the kind of room I would have found lovely under any other circumstances. The first week was strange but bearable. Madame Park kept her distance. We ate dinner in the same room without speaking directly to each other. She asked me once formally how I was feeling. I told her I was well, thank you. She nodded and returned her attention to her food. Jae-won called every evening. Those calls were the best part of every day. He always asked about the baby first and then about me, and then he told me small details about his days and soul, careful details, the ones he was permitted to share. He always ended with the same words, "I will be home soon, I promise." I held those words carefully like something fragile. By the end of the first week, the shape of things began to shift. It started small. Mrs. O came to my room one morning and mentioned, with careful politeness, that Madame Park had asked if I would mind helping with some light tasks around the house since the younger staff had been reassigned temporarily to other duties. Light tasks? I was 5 months pregnant, but I was not fragile and I did not want to appear difficult. I said, of course, I should have understood then what was beginning. It did not happen all at once. That is the thing about this kind of treatment that is hardest to explain to people who have never experienced it. It did not arrive like a storm. It arrived like a tide, slowly, quietly, so gradually that by the time the water was at your chin, you had almost convinced yourself it had always been this way. The second week, I was asked to help prepare meals, not cook beside the kitchen staff as a guest helping out. Prepare meals, wake up before 6 in the morning and report to the kitchen and follow Mrs. O's direction on what needed chopping, what needed washing, what needed to be timed and watched and plated. I did it. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself these were unusual circumstances. By the third week, the younger staff had not returned, and I had become the person scrubbing the kitchen counters after every meal. I was mopping the entryway. I was carrying laundry baskets up and down the stairs. 7 weeks pregnant with a girl who kicked like she was already trying to fight her way out into the world. The comments began around the same time, not from Madame Park directly, she was too precise for that. They came from Mrs. O, who delivered them with the smooth, practiced tone of someone passing along messages they had been given. Madame says the kitchen floor needs to be done by hand, not the mop. She is particular about the marble. Madame says the laundry should be folded a certain way. She will show you once. And then, one evening at the dinner table, I was no longer eating with the family by this point. I was served a plate in the kitchen. Mrs. O relayed something that stopped me completely. Madame says it is better this way. She says the family table is for family. I sat alone in that kitchen with a plate of food I could not taste, and I looked at my hands and I thought, I am this man's wife. I am carrying his child. And they have put me in the kitchen like hired help. I did not cry. I thought about crying, and then I thought about Jae-won's voice on the phone the night before, telling me he was exhausted but safe, asking if I was resting enough. Telling me to be gentle with myself. I thought about the weight he was already carrying, and I picked up my fork, and I ate my food alone. Madame Park had a sister who visited in the 4th week. Her name was Mrs. Chung, and where Madame Park was cold in the refined way of someone who has learned to conceal their feelings, Mrs. Chung was cold in the careless way of someone who has never felt the need to bother. She arrived on a Sunday afternoon and walked through the house with the authority of someone who had grown up in it. She looked at everything with sharp, assessing eyes, the furniture, the garden, the arrangement of flowers in the entryway, and then she looked at me. I was coming down the stairs with a basket of folded linens. She stood in the hallway below and watched me descend, and her expression, I have thought about that expression many times since. It was not hatred, it was something almost worse than hatred. It was dismissal, as if I were an inconvenience someone had left in the house that no one had gotten around to removing. She spoke to Madame Park in Korean. I did not understand every word, but I understood the shape of the conversation. I had been with Jae-won long enough to understand the shape of things even when I could not follow the words. I heard one phrase I recognized because Jae-won had taught it to me once in a different context. Mixed blood, seorosium, used then to mean something beautiful about our child. Used now to mean something else entirely. Mrs. Chung gestured toward my stomach when she said it. Madame Park did not respond, but she also did not correct her sister. That silence cost her everything eventually. I carried that basket to the laundry room, I set it down. I stood over it for a long moment with my hands pressed flat against a stack of warm, folded linen. I breathed slowly and deliberately the way my mother taught me to breathe when something hurt too much for the ordinary kind of breathing. Then I straightened my back, and I went back to work. Every evening at 8 o'clock, Jae-won called, and every evening at 8 o'clock I became a different woman. I sat on the edge of my bed, the beautiful bed in the beautiful room with the beautiful window, and I held my phone with both hands, and when I heard his voice, something in me unclenched for just a moment. Just long enough to breathe. He always asked the same questions in the same order. How is the baby? How are you feeling? Are you eating enough? Are you sleeping? And I always answered the same way. She is kicking beautifully. I am feeling well. Yes, yes. He told me once that he had spoken with his mother and that she had said I was settling in comfortably. He said she had told him I was being well cared for. I remember exactly where I was sitting when he said that. I remember the feeling that moved through me, not anger, not quite. Something older than anger, something that comes from being told by someone else's words that your suffering does not exist. I said, "That is good to hear." He asked if I was sure I was all right. He said I sounded tired. I said, "I am always a little tired, that is just the pregnancy." He said he missed me. He said he thought about me every hour. He said he had started talking to the baby through the phone, which made me laugh, genuinely laugh, for the first time in days. He said, "Tell her I am coming home." I lay back on that bed afterward, one hand on my stomach, feeling her move beneath my palm, and I talked to her quietly in Amharic. I told her about her father. I told her he was a good man. I told her we were going to be all right. I was not sure I believed it entirely, but I said it because I needed her to know who she was coming into. There is one night I have never spoken about to anyone, not fully. It was a Thursday, week 7. I had spent the day on my feet from 6 in the morning, cleaning, cooking, carrying. By evening, my lower back had been aching for hours with the kind of deep, insistent pain that pregnancy makes worse. My ankles were swollen. I had not sat down since noon. Mrs. Chung was still in the house. She was leaving the next morning. At dinner, she said something to Madame Park that made both women look toward the kitchen doorway, toward me, and Mrs. Chung laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was the laugh of someone enjoying something that is not actually funny, but rather satisfying in a small, private way. I turned back to the stove. That night, I went to my room and I sat on the bathroom floor. I do not fully know why the floor, only that it felt like the right place to be, and I let myself feel for 20 minutes. Everything I had been carrying. I pressed my back against the cold tile wall. I put both hands on my stomach, and I cried, not the quiet, contained tears I had been allowing myself in small doses, the real kind. The kind that comes from somewhere beneath language. I cried for my husband who did not know. I cried for my daughter who was absorbing all of this from the inside. I cried for my mother in Addis Ababa who had told me gently when I announced my engagement, "Amara, love is real, but the world around love is also real. Make sure you know both." I cried because I was alone in a way that had no map. And then, at exactly 20 minutes, I had given myself 20 minutes and I was keeping that promise. I stopped. I washed my face. I looked at myself in that mirror for a long time. I said out loud to my own reflection, "You are Amara Tesfaye, you have not broken yet. And you will not break tonight." I went to bed. I woke up the next morning. I went back to work. He did not tell me he was coming. I found out later that the situation in Seoul had resolved more quickly than expected in the final days. A resolution reached in a late-night meeting that he described only as difficult but finished. He had gone directly from that meeting to the airport. He had been on a plane for 15 hours. He did not call ahead because he wanted to surprise me. He told me later to walk through the door and see my face before I had a chance to compose it. He got what he wanted, but it was not my face that told him everything. It was the scene he walked into. I did not hear the car. The kitchen was at the back of the house and I was down on the floor on my hands and knees, 7 months pregnant. With a cloth in my hand and a bucket of soapy water beside me, scrubbing the marble because Madame Park had told Mrs. O to tell me that there were spots near the service entrance that needed attention before the afternoon guests arrived. I heard the front door open. I heard footsteps in the entryway. I heard Madame Park say something sharply in Korean, and then I heard his voice, and then everything stopped. I heard him say my name, not called out, not shouted, said quietly. The way you say something when your entire understanding of a situation has just changed and you need a moment to catch up to the reality in front of you. Amara. I sat back on my heels. I turned. He was standing in the kitchen doorway. He was still in his travel clothes, dark coat, wrinkled shirt, the particular exhaustion of someone who has crossed too many time zones in too many hours. He had a small bag over one shoulder. He was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was not anger, not yet. It was something that comes before anger, recognition. The terrible kind. The kind where you see something you cannot unsee, and you understand in an instant every implication of it. And the understanding is physical. It hits you in the chest and the stomach simultaneously. He looked at me on that floor. He looked at my hands. He looked at the bucket beside me. He looked at my face, the tiredness there, the thinness, the particular shadows that 11 weeks of invisible suffering leave on a person's face whether they intend them to show or not. He set his bag down on the floor slowly. He crossed the kitchen. He knelt down in front of me on that marble floor, this man who ran a powerful organization, who had just come from negotiations that shook powerful people, and he knelt in front of me and he took my hands in both of his. He turned them over. He looked at my knuckles, red, cracked, chafed from weeks of work they were never meant for. He said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was very quiet. He said, "How long?" I said, "Jae-won." He said, "Amara, how long?" I looked at him. The man I had been protecting for 11 weeks with every conversation, every cheerful phone call, every "I am fine. I promise." I looked at the face that I had memorized in so many different lights and moods and expressions. And I said, "Since the second week." He closed his eyes. He did not stand up immediately. He stayed on his knees in front of me for a moment longer, holding my hands with his eyes closed. I could see him processing everything, the phone calls playing back in his memory, every reassurance I had given him. Everything is fine, every cheerful description of quiet evenings and good meals and restful days. He was understanding all at once that none of it had been true. When he opened his eyes, there was something in them that made me want to reach for him. He said, "Can you stand?" I said yes. He helped me up from that floor with both hands, carefully, steadily. He put one hand at my back. He led me out of the kitchen. He sat me down in the sitting room, not the formal sitting room where Madame Park received guests, but the smaller one near the stairs that nobody used, and he brought me a glass of water and he sat across from me. And he said very calmly, "Tell me everything." So I did. I had protected him for 11 weeks. I had swallowed every difficult thing, every indignity, every lonely meal, every cruel silence, every word that had been aimed at my daughter before she even arrived in the world. I told him all of it. I did not cry while I told him. I had used my crying. I was past the place where crying helped. I told him about the kitchen, the floor, the meals alone, Mrs. O delivering instructions as if I were staff, Mrs. Chung's visit and what she had said and the way Madame Park had not corrected her. I told him about the Thursday night on the bathroom floor. I told him about the back pain that had been constant for 4 weeks. I told him about how I had spent every evening talking to our daughter in Amharic because I needed her to hear a voice that loved her without condition. He listened to every word the way he had listened to me at that fundraiser 6 years earlier. completely, without interrupting, tilting his head slightly when something landed harder than the rest. When I finished, the sitting room was very quiet. He stood up, he walked to the doorway, and he stood there for a moment with his back to me. I watched his shoulders. Then he turned around, and his face was composed in the way that, in all our years together, had come to mean, I know exactly what I am going to do. He said, you are not going to spend another hour in this house being treated this way. I need you to go upstairs and rest. I need you to stay there until I come to you. I said, Jae-won, please don't do anything that, he said, Amara. He crossed back to me. He knelt in front of me again, this time taking my face gently in his hands. I am not going to do anything foolish, I promise, but I need you to let me handle this. This is my family, and what they did was wrong, and I need to be the one who says it. I looked at him for a long moment. I nodded. I was not in the room. He came to me an hour later and told me what had happened, and over the years since I have heard various pieces of it from other sources as well. I will tell you what I know. He gathered his mother, Mrs. O, and the 2 junior staff members in the formal sitting room. He stood before them without sitting. He told his mother, in Korean, deliberately, so there would be no confusion about what was said or meant, that he had returned home to find his pregnant wife on the floor of the kitchen performing labor that no woman in her condition and no member of his family should ever have been asked to perform. Madame Park began to speak. He said, I am not finished. The room went very quiet. He said that he had trusted his family to care for the most important person in his life during one of the most vulnerable periods of her life. He said that what had happened in this house during his absence was not a misunderstanding or a cultural difference or a matter of household management. It was a betrayal, a deliberate, sustained betrayal of a woman who had done nothing but love him quietly and completely. He said that his wife's name was Amara. He said it the correct way, Amara. He said it so the room could hear it properly. He said she was not Jae-won's wife, she was not a guest, she was not staff. She was the mother of his child and the head of his household, and she would be treated with the dignity and the honor those titles demanded, without exception, from that moment forward. He said that Mrs. Chung was not to set foot in his house again. He said that Mrs. O would answer to his wife, not the other way around, and if that arrangement was not acceptable, Mrs. O was free to find other employment. He said one final thing, looking directly at his mother. He said, you have spent years deciding whether Amara is worthy of this family. I am telling you tonight that the question was never about her. Amara has shown more grace, more dignity, and more love in the past 11 weeks than this house has offered her in the past 6 years. The question has always been whether this family is worthy of her. He left the room. He knocked on my bedroom door softly. I told him to come in. He sat beside me on the bed. He did not say anything immediately. He just sat there close, and after a moment he reached over and took my hand. He said, I am sorry. I said, you did not know. He said, I should have known. I should have understood what I was leaving you with. I should have. I put my hand over his. I said, Jae-won, I need you to hear me. He looked at me. I said, I chose not to tell you. That was my decision. I made it because I love you and I did not want you carrying my weight while you were trying to carry your own. I am not sorry I made that choice. I would make it again. He said, that is exactly the problem. You should never have had to make that choice. We sat with that for a moment. He said, I am moving us out of this house. We will find our own home, something ours. I said, what about your mother? He was quiet for a moment. He said, my mother has a decision to make about who she wants to be to this family. That is her work to do, not ours. I looked at him, the man I had married, the man I had spent 11 weeks protecting because I believed with everything I had that he was worth protecting. I thought about the moment he had knelt on the kitchen floor and taken my cracked hands in his. I said, she is kicking. His face changed completely. He pressed his hand gently against my stomach, and we sat there together, both of us feeling her move, that small, insistent life that had been through everything I had been through and was still stubbornly, beautifully, fiercely alive. He said something to her quietly in Korean, I said something to her in Amharic. Somewhere in the middle of those two languages, she kicked again. We moved out of the estate 3 days later. Jae-won found us a home, not a mansion, not an estate, but a real home. A house with a garden and good light and a kitchen where I only cooked when I wanted to. Madame Park did not speak to us for 6 weeks. At the end of those 6 weeks, she called Jae-won. He told me about the call afterward. She had said, and he told me she said it with difficulty, the way a person says something they have been rehearsing for a long time, that she believed she had made errors. That the situation had not been handled as it should have been, that she wished to meet with me if I was willing. I thought about it for 3 days. I talked to my mother in Addis Ababa, who reminded me gently that forgiveness is not a gift you give the other person. It is a weight you put down for yourself. I agreed to meet. It was not a dramatic meeting. There were no declarations or tears, no sweeping apologies that resolved everything cleanly. Madame Park is not a woman who does things with abandon. She is precise about everything, including difficult conversations. She looked at me across a table and said, in careful English, she used English deliberately, so I would understand every word, that she had allowed her own fears and her own limitations to become something harmful. She said she understood if I could not forgive her. She said she wanted me to know that she saw now what her son saw in me. I said I appreciated her honesty. I said I was not ready to forget, but I was willing to try to understand. She nodded. We sat together a little longer, two very different women with one person between us that we both loved. It was a beginning, small, imperfect, real. Our daughter was born on a Sunday morning in May, when the light was coming through the hospital window in wide, warm bands and the whole world smelled like new season. She came quickly and loudly and with great personal conviction, which her father said was exactly what he expected. Jae-won held her first, and I watched his face do the thing I had seen it do when we confirmed the pregnancy, that enormous, soft thing that has no easy name. He held her toward the window. He said something to her in Korean that he translated for me later. You are both things completely. Never let anyone tell you differently. Then he placed her in my arms. I held my daughter for the first time, and I felt the entire weight of everything, the 11 weeks, the kitchen floor, the lonely meals, the Thursday night on the bathroom tile, the cracked hands. The silent phone calls, all of it, settling somewhere deep and quiet, as if it had been waiting for this moment to find its place. I said to her in Amharic, you took a long time to get here. But you were worth every second of the wait. She looked at me with the unfocused, ancient eyes that newborns have, eyes that seem to have already seen something you cannot name. I counted her fingers, all 10. I counted her toes, all 10. Jae-won sat on the edge of the bed close. His hand was on my back, his eyes were wet. We stayed like that for a long time, the three of us, while the Sunday light moved across the room and the world outside continued without us. Completely unaware that something irreplaceable had just begun. I have thought about those 11 weeks every day since they ended. Not with bitterness, that surprised me. I expected bitterness, and instead I found something else. Something harder to name but more useful. I learned that silence is not always weakness. Sometimes silence is the shape that love takes when it cannot afford to be disrupted. Sometimes you carry things not because you have no choice, but because you have made a deliberate choice about what matters more than your own comfort. I carried those 11 weeks so that Jae-won could focus on keeping himself safe. I would do it again, but I also learned that carrying a burden alone for too long changes the shape of your hands. I learned that dignity is not something anyone can take from you, even when they take everything else. Dignity lives in the place where you decide on a cold bathroom floor with your back against the tile that you are still yourself, that your name is still your name. That your daughter is still coming and she still deserves everything. I learned that the people who love you, when they finally see the truth, are capable of rising to meet it in ways that make you grateful you held on. And I learned this is the one that took me longest, that forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. Forgiveness is simply the decision to stop letting someone else's cruelty live rent-free inside a heart that was built for better things. Madame Park will never be an easy woman. She is who she is, shaped by a world I do not fully understand and a grief I have only glimpsed the edges of, but she comes to our home on holidays now. She sits at our table, the one where we all eat together. She calls me Amara. She says it close to correctly. She loves her granddaughter in the precise, careful way she loves everything. And her granddaughter, our brilliant, stubborn, light-filled daughter, has already figured out at 3 years old exactly how to make her grandmother smile. Children have a way of breaking down walls that adults have spent decades building. Jae-won and I are still learning each other. That is what marriage is, not a destination you arrive at, but a practice you return to every morning. Some mornings are easy, some are the kind that require the deliberate, slow kind of breathing. But every morning, without exception, he is there. And every morning, without exception, so am I. My name is Amara Park. I am a daughter of Ethiopia and a mother of this family and a wife to a man who came home, saw the truth, and did not look away. And my daughter, she knows exactly who she is, both parts, completely. That is the only ending that matters. Thank you for sitting with this story if it moved you. Please share it with someone who needs to be reminded, you are allowed to be loved completely. Not despite who you are, because of it.